welcome. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarney, a water strategy consultant doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And today we are absolutely thrilled to be joined by Cody Friesen, who is the founder and CEO of Source. Cody, great to see you and welcome to Kickstart Season 4. How are you?
Awesome to be here. The good thing is that it only can get better through the season. So, you're not starting, you haven't set the bar too high. So let's see how this all plays out. And then, the next guest will not have to clear too high of a bar to keep the momentum.
Well, we actually chose you to set the bar. So no
yes,
pressure. There you go. All right.
No pressure.
Yeah. Just a heads up as we launch into this conversation.
Yeah. Right after Zoom says you're recording. By the way, we forgot to tell you. Right.
There you go. So, Cody, we wanted to, I guess, with the change in direction in the season, is kind of bring in perhaps people that are doing things business as unusual, disruptors, people and solutions that are thinking about water slightly differently. And admittedly, the air to water sort of market, you're leading the way there. Within Source, arguably kind of one of the poster boys of this movement, and some amazing work you're doing. So, but I think before we kind of get into some of the more details, is tell us, when you're the founder of the company, right? So we'd love to know your origin story, kind of if you go back a little bit before we even come into the the 50 million investment and the tech side, and where did the idea come from?
Yeah, so I'm not from the water space historically, other than the fact that I consume a lot of water, I suppose. I did a PhD in material science at MIT, and so I've been sort of in the renewable energy space, broadly defined, for the last 2 decades. So I became a professor of material science at Arizona State University in 2004, which is why I'm sitting in Scottsdale, Arizona right now. Built a battery company and took that global starting in 2007. Served on the U.S. Manufacturing Council as the co-chair of the energy subcommittee during the Obama years. And so, sort of been thinking about the renewable space for a long time. And one of the things that we saw, even back in circa 2010, is that solar was on this 30-year log linear cost trajectory, and lithium-ion batteries were on about a 20-year cost trajectory similarly. And so if you just sort of drew the line forward, you can see that, solar is going to be cheaper than coal in like 2015 or 2016. And of course that then happened. And that caused me to think about, like, from an innovation and from a technical perspective, what's next in renewables. And that's sort of what led to the conception that became Source. And sort of, I can give you a little bit more background of growing up in the Arizona desert and those sorts of things, and sort of thinking about water stress from a water scarcity perspective. And then when I was building the battery company, spending a lot of time in, for example, Indonesia, where there's 3 meters of rainfall every year and yet nothing to drink, and sort of all of that juxtaposition flowing to the sort of recognition that maybe there's something we could do from a renewables conception, or the principles of renewables in water. So that's kind of the preamble to the origin story.
Cody, I love the linkage, lessons learned from, energy, the renewable transition, and thinking about the water sector as, as it stands right now, essentially the status quo, fundamentally not being renewable, which is kind of crazy because the hydrologic cycle is renewable, right, which is where you fit with Source and how you're thinking about it very differently.
Yeah, and I think, there's, to kind of keep it in the sort of ethereal level a little bit here, you think about kind of historical energy, right, coal and other fossil fuels as a linear resource, right? We dig it out of the ground, coal's free in the ground, we stick it in a coal car, we move it, some number of miles in the train, we then burn it in a multi-billion-dollar plant, and we send it in wires to your home. Simplified, of course, but that's a linear definition of a linear resource. And of course, solar starts out way more expensive, but was on an exponential track, right? Because The photons come to solar PV for free, so the feedstock is free wherever you are. And then if you can sort of get geometric response on both the performance or efficiency and the cost of production, then over time, no matter what, mathematically, it has to win. And so sort of think about water as a strong corollary to that, right? It's literally very similar, right? It's free in the ground or on the surface. You then pump it, treat it, and then put it into infrastructure and move it. I'd argue that pipes are a lot harder to keep in shape than wires. And so there's an opportunity here to sort of rethink something so that we think of as sort of so basic and so obvious as the way to do it, because it's the way it's always been done. But then if you apply the learnings from kind of the renewable space, you start to see that if you can go from taxi medallions and, you know, kind of that linear resource to Uber, right? You go from something that's linear and scarce to everybody's an Uber driver and everybody can get a car anywhere at any time, right? If you can do that in water, it's a fundamental shift. Not even talking about how you do that yet, just, you know, conceptually.
Right. You know, there are people in the sector, you know, people in the water sector that say that we don't quite have an Uber for water. Nothing as transformative yet, which, you know, we can get into a little bit later, but it's interesting, you know, just identifying that essentially the technology we have is Roman. I mean, it's basically the same thing. We get it from a source, we move it around, we treat it, use it, throw it away, repeat. And that's not sustainable or resilient in the face of climate change right now. It's not. So, you know, any notion that we could make incremental changes on something that's been around for a very long period of time and, you know, not just survive, but thrive is, I think, a fool's errand.
Yeah, I think there's sort of like three elements there. One is it's not sustainable, right? It doesn't, it's not the way to go forward. It also doesn't work currently or historically for everyone. Right?
Right.
Very rich country, infrastructure works. By the way, US is not one of those, right? And then the third element here is how do you attract venture capital to the space? How do you attract research dollars and investment dollars to the ideas that are going to make it sustainable and work for everyone? Venture capital doesn't work on linear resources. It only works in exponential disconnect from sort of the chains of linearity, right? And that should invoke, you know, innovators across the space thinking about how do you bring exponentiality to any given space, to taxi cars and to going from, you know, line, you know, physical telephone line phone service to cell phones, right? And you can kind of keep going in all the different spaces where exponentiality has come in and completely disrupted the space in a way that was entirely surprising to all the experts.
The installed base.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is proposing to disrupt the installed base, the centralized treatment, right? So just talk us through in terms, because it's kind of the you've got this whole spectrum of solutions when it comes to kind of air to water, right from very primitive kind of fog harvesting nets to capture that moisture in the air, right through to, I guess, where you are, which is digitally enabled hydropanels, much more advanced, right? So in terms of, for people listening, in terms of the availability of water and potential abundance of water in air to capture it, that's essentially your Uber model, isn't it? You're telling people there's water everywhere if we just take it from the air, essentially.
Yeah, Tom, that's a good framing, because it's, again, keeping away from how you do it for just a moment, to keep it kind of in that level of what is the resource, right? In the troposphere, lower part of the atmosphere, there's 10 to the 16 kilograms of water vapor at any given time, and its average lifespan is about a week, so a hydrologic cycle. That's about 6 times all the volume of all the rivers on the planet at any given time. But importantly, and interestingly, so for example, if you took that research, say, okay, well, how much is that? That's like 100 million years worth of all humans' water, right? Any given time. And then you say, well, what is, if we've gone up by approximately 1 degree Celsius over the last 30 years due to climate change, what's the excess amount of water in the atmosphere, right? So that's even an interesting question. And that turns out to be about 10 to 14 kilograms. So about 1%, so more. So that 1% more is, of course, why storms are much more aggressive and all the other things. But that 1% more also corresponds to way more water than humanity needs for, for consumption purposes. So that resource is not only massive, it's growing. And so it is only then a thermodynamic question of, well, how do you then, very efficiently and in a distributed way, in an infrastructure free way, make that liquid and make that safe water for consumption.
Oh, I was going to say it's a new source of water. I mean, in quotes, new source, and that you're tapping into it in a way that humanity has not in the past.
Yeah, and I think so that's right where it gets into, I didn't start with, oh, I've got, a hammer looking for a nail. I started with a nail and was sort of, here's the problem statement. How do we think about sort of from a thermodynamic perspective, what's the most efficient way to arrive at liquid water from water vapor in a way that would work essentially under all Earth relevant conditions, powered by the sun, right? So you say, okay, well, I want it to be infrastructure free and distributed. I'm coming from a renewable energy mindset. So as soon as you invoke, a power cord going in, you invoke infrastructure and you invoke a cost of that electricity. And as soon as you invoke the cost of electricity, the cost of the resource is no longer zero. And the resource has to be zero, because then all you're fighting is capex on the kind of geometric scaling curve, which is what enables you to have exponentiality, right? So again, not the how yet, but just sort of the principle level or the philosophical level. So then if you're saying, okay, it's sunlight, and then you're saying, well, it needs to be able to operate across a wide range of atmospheric conditions, then it's only, okay, how could I most simply grab that water? And of course, as a material scientist, this is where the hammer does come in, which is, you sort of, the example I often give, because it's sort of everybody experiences it, is, you go into your favorite greasy spoon restaurant, and then you have, kind of the salt shaker and then the rice kernels in the salt shaker, right? And the rice kernels are there to steal the water vapor so that the salt doesn't get clumpy from deliquescing under the humid conditions. And of course, what's happening there is that the rice is more hygroscopic than the salt, of course, right? So now you can imagine, instead of rice, you can imagine sort of special rice that's a nanostructured material that does that process very rapidly and concentrates the water vapor by about 10,000 times by volume. And so now you have the ability to create a condition where the density of water is high enough that if you then expose that special rice to sunlight, that water vapor then obviously respires, and you can do that many hundreds of times per day. Now, of course, that kind of gets you to the condition where you are equivalent to when you walk out of your home in the morning and there's dew on leaves, except where it's at high noon in the middle of the summer in Scottsdale. To make that efficient now, right? That's where it's actually multiple types of materials, and there's a machine learning algorithm on top of a deterministic algorithm, and there's a bunch of things that come together to make that actually really efficient. But the sticking with the principle of, okay, how do we do this in a way that's almost passive, right? We're sort of nature-based solution here. You think about sort of passive concentration of water vapor, and then the condensation process is passive in the sense that we're just ultimately pushing the dew point inside the hydropanel above ambient, even when it's 47 degrees Celsius outside. The dynamics between those two boundaries are where the sophistication comes in, but at its base, that's how simple it is. And so that means that from an OpEx perspective, we're essentially delta off of zero OpEx, right? doesn't cost anything to run that thing. And so it is only a CapEx battle as you scale source to really get to the cost of water that we produce.
Right, because there's no there's no ongoing electricity needed once you've paid the capex to get the hydro panels installed. It's continuously generating water, and the investment is done, right?
That's right.
And even the digital element of it to tell you how much water is in there, and then eventually more data on water quality, that's all done self-sufficiently from the solar side of it, right?
Right. Yeah, that's right. And now, because it's water and because people are consuming it, you know, every single one of those hydro panels connects to the cloud, and then we monitor it in our NOC 24/7, 92 parameters every hydro panel, so that we know the amount we produce, we know that they're working, we know that the water is safe to consume. We know that we've hit, you know, our ozonation inside the hydro panel, that we've hit a CT of 2 every hour, right? So we know that it starts pure, we know that it stays sterile, we know that it's mineralized by its conductivity. So really fully digitizing, fully distributed renewable water.
Cody, you know, you talk about exponential technologies quite a bit, and the value and how disruptive they can be. I mean, what the hydro panel is, you know, in quotes, a marriage of digital as an exponential technology and then advanced material science as an exponential technology to give you something that can deliver in a way that's unique in the marketplace from a technology and source of water perspective. You know, for me, I find that really interesting and very, very unique in terms of the narrative and how you think about technology innovation.
Yeah, and I think it is actually layers of exponentiality that gives sort of credence to where we're headed, right? So if you look at the front of a source hydro panel, there you can see there's a piece of that is PV, which of course is running all the electronics. That, where our current cost structure wouldn't be possible without the last 30 years or 40 years of cost down in PV. And the same thing with the microelectronics that are inside, right? We pay 37 cents for a little ARM processor that, you know, 32-bit ARM processor that is equivalent to what was in, you know, early generations of the iPhone, basically, right? You think about what that would have cost 30 years ago. And so, and then the ability to learn at an ever accelerating rate is predicated on the ability to have access to the data in real time. And so there's all of these layers, these shoulders of giants that we're standing on to move this forward. And whether like Cody is right or not is sort of irrelevant. This will happen. This will happen in this way because we've seen it in every other sector. I don't mean this way meaning our technology. I mean, of course, that's what we're intending to do. But I mean that eventually somebody will figure out how to break free of the linear resource, right? And we've seen it over and over and over and over again. And that's, by the way, how now there are whatever 6 billion smartphones on the planet, and the poorest, the most modest lives amongst us, let's say, have access to all of humanity's information. There is no longer information poverty, right? One could argue that there's very limited vaccine poverty anymore. There's very limited food poverty, right? But there's a hell of a lot of water poverty.
Right. Even in the US.
Even in the US.
To your point about infrastructure and inequity and access.
Yeah, it has to happen. We have to democratize water, and democratization happens with exponentiality. If we don't do it, somebody will do it. And God damn it, I mean, that's the water sector, that's what we have to be talking about to bring investment dollars to go solve these, because we need an ecosystem of tens of thousands of innovators and entrepreneurs to be thinking about these problems, right? And to be funded by the kinds of dollars that are looking for returns that come with really breakthrough solutions, not with incrementalism, not with having the voices of the installed base, which would be like a bad engineering manager talking about sort of sustained innovation, as opposed to true innovation, which is where you can't look at it and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. You have to look at it and go, wait, how is that possible? And how does this work in my worldview? And you have to, that's a necessary but insufficient condition. to true innovation.
Right.
Yeah, it should be like magic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, was it Ray Bradbury? No, I think Arthur C. Clarke said that, advanced technologies are indistinguishable from magic, essentially.
Yeah.
And, that's disruption as opposed to, and I keep coming back to this, if you took a Roman and brought him into the US or any water infrastructure, it's like, yeah, I know what you're doing. Nothing's really changed. I mean, we've gotten, allegedly better at it, but the reality is we're still doing it the same way.
We still talk about how much rain fell out of the sky.
Yes.
Right?
and hope for rain.
Yeah.
And talk about a drought. And it's like, we're nuts. We're absolutely out of our minds on this.
Well, but I think you are, the main progenitor of, it's a wicked problem, and water is a wicked problem. And that is true of every problem before it is solved.
Yes.
Wicked problem.
Yes. And, and we need people to come and look at the sector and say, you're out of your mind. Let's try this, because I've seen it before, or I haven't seen it before, but I can piece together things that I've seen before that have worked.
What's really cool is I've been joining, there's a couple different groups that, and their names of them are speaking in my mind now, but where it's like basically, bringing together entrepreneurs in the water space so that investors can look at it. And I've been, I go on those Zoom calls and I watch the pitches, and there are a lot of freaking smart young people out there innovating in this space. And you look at it and then you go, okay, so there's that, you got the kernel, right? And then the next layer is a bunch of people shitting on them. And then the next layer is investors that aren't there, right? And so how do you go from that condition to one where you have breakout successes that kill off the naysayers, that then allow investment dollars to flow to the space? Like thinking as an ecosystem, that's what's required. You have to have a few breakouts to kill off the naysayers that allow the investment dollars to come. Because when I look at the types of venture firms and the scale of venture firms that are, or other types of investors that are looking at those innovations, it's just not there. It's like a fraction of other spaces, right? And for example, why are there now, many multi-billion-dollar funds chasing the renewable space after it's already done? And we can talk about creativity amongst the investor set, whatnot, but you think about the, kind of the whatever, let's take another corollary, right? The oil and gas lobby 10 years ago, just beating down on solar, right? It's been, obviously, we've seen what's happened. You think about the big three automotive in the US 10 years ago, talking about Tesla as, don't worry about, this is just a box with batteries in it, no innovation, they'll never build enough cars. So now, of course, we see what the world is. So those proof points have to come through that then generate the dollars. And so that's kind of from a sector perspective, now that I guess I'm officially in the water sector, if you guys will allow me in. I didn't get my card yet. Is there a card?
Actually, there's a lapel pin.
Oh,
it's coming. It's coming.
But and you don't have to wear a sport coat, but there is a lapel pin that comes with it.
Okay. Yeah, I like those. Yeah.
I think, I mean, because we can talk about the capex and the opex and all that stuff, but when we started talking about this, Will, on a previous episode of the stream, what about beyond the kind of the tangible dollars of investing into the infrastructure, for like a community or a small village that doesn't have access to water, and say, for example, the young girls of the family have to walk several miles a day to get water and come back, the cost of them being able to go back into education, right, as a result of having a decentralized solution, goes beyond the capex and the opex and the investment, right? And I think that's a part of this that doesn't, because you mentioned, right, there are a lot of naysayers in the world with any new innovation, anything that's truly disruptive, people are going to be very critical of it until it's proven a success, right? And so I think, but that's a part of this discussion that I always bring in that doesn't often get talked about. It's like, what about, okay, well, don't do the apples and pears comparison between centralized and decentralized. actually, what about a community or a village or a home that doesn't have access to water in the very first place?
Yeah.
Right? If this can make a difference and give them 10, 15, 20 liters a day by having multiple panels, then the cost and the benefit of that far outweighs anything else.
Yeah, Tom. So there's sort of several interesting things there. So, in many of almost every installation we do, we are the lowest cost solution, which should tell you everything you need to know about how big the alternative costs really are in so many places, right? That exact thinking about a year ago, so I might have the numbers slightly off here, but this is going to be roughly correct. I had that thought of, okay, well, all right, it turns out that the right term is the GDP PPP per hour. So the gross domestic product purchasing power parity per hour. So in India, you can look this up for every country in the world. In India, it's about $3.40 an hour, okay? And the average distance walked is about 5 kilometers for water. And then you can look at the average rate of walking while carrying something, it's about 3.5 kilometers per hour, right? So now, and then you say, okay, well, how much can a reasonable, a girl or a young woman carry? And so that turns out to be about 60 or 70 cents a liter direct cost to the economy associated with walking for water rather than doing something else. Because the way that the GDP PPP per hour works is what's the value to the economy of a human, right, per hour. So it's a real number. It's a macroeconomic number, but it's not like some social science number. It's a true number, right? So already that's like insane, right? Keep in mind that the global average price of bottled water is 55 cents a liter. That includes all the places that bottled water is very cheap. So it's far more expensive than that in India for a woman or girl to walk for water every day. That's just the macro. Now you go to the micro and you say, in India, again, you can look up these numbers, what is the cost of a diarrheal case, non-hospitalized and then hospitalized, right, to the state, right? So this is real, again, real dollars per person. What's the average number of diarrheal cases per year that are non-hospitalized and are hospitalized? So when you do that math, I can't, not off the top of my head, but let's say it's about $150 a year or something per person, something like that. Roughly the right number. So then you go and you back out, okay, well, how much does that correspond to in terms of the cost of their drinking water, which is the thing that most likely gave them diarrhea in the first place. It's something like 30 or 40 cents a liter to drink parasitic water that gives you diarrhea that then is direct cost to the state. So when you start looking at that alternative cost, and you can cut it 10 more ways, right? Then you can get into social science. Like, what is the cost of a girl not getting educated? What is the cost of her lack of self-actualization? What is, all of those things, the cost of the economy of, obviously the number of children that people have is correlated to their education, all that stuff, right? So it turns out you're spot on, Tom. Like the real cost of crappy water is embarrassingly high. It comes back to this, like, here we are talking on Zoom, on, devices that have access to all of humanity's information. And then 200 million hours are going to be spent today by women and girls fetching water.
Right.
How is this 2021? Right. And so I think the right way to think about it is, of course, water gets effectively, well, with a lot of externalities ignored, water gets effectively free when the infrastructure is great, right? If it's there, and if you ignore the externalities, it's essentially free. But then when you take away that, suddenly the real cost structure is massive. And that's, we've got 54,000 Navajo in Arizona, 54,000 that have no water to their homes.
And why do we accept that? I mean, to me, it's just mind blowing that we accept it. The sector accepts it. And there's no reason for
it. If you think about the cost of running a pipe to any one of those 54,000 people, it so immediately is just so orders of magnitude off of what's possible that the only place to land is acceptance. Unless you have a different answer.
Right.
So whereabouts do you have, because obviously you got the 50 million investment, and last time I looked, you're in about 45 different countries. So what's the kind of like to maybe kind of bring things to an end is what's like your game plan for the next 5 years? 'Cause I think, random question, but does Robert Downey Jr. have one of your, does he use one of your hydro panels? Just randomly read that. I know, a bit of a change in direction, but I was thinking, okay, well, Iron Man has it and uses it, so surely like it's one of the best ambassadors for the brand.
Yeah, Iron Man has it. I was just in Kenya a couple of weeks ago, and the rangers who protect the last 2 northern white rhinos on the planet now have source, right? So Iron Men that act, and then true Iron Men in the world.
Right. Actual true Iron Man.
Doing good things.
I think we're now at like 52 countries or something. We've done about 500 homes in the Navajo Nation now. We're just starting a 1,000 home project in Central Valley, California. Done work in Appalachia. Done over 1,000 homes for the Aboriginal Housing Office in Australia for Australian Indigenous. And so, it's a really wide range, but it's sort of the corollary, right, of the solar module can go on a home and can go to a multi-gigawatt array kind of range. So the next 5 years, to answer your question, it is all about, so we've had about a 37% cost performance learning curve over the last, since I founded the company. So 37% year over year on average cost performance gains. So the goal is to keep it at that level. Solar at its peak was about 28% cost performance gains. That's a high rate of compounding. If we can keep it at that level, which of course is not a given, it's a lot of work. You can do the math that the water we then produce in a very short amount of time, sub 10 years, is the lowest cost delivered potable water on the planet. If we get within a long distance of that, to your point about, the real cost of, walking for water and other, unsafe water, if we get within a long distance of that, within an order of magnitude of that number, right, factor 10 of that number, we change the world. And that's what this is about for me. I really, kind of going back to that renewables thing, what I love about the renewable energy space, and you guys will get this, is that you're solving a massive problem, right? But guess what? You never touch individual humans. With this, what we're doing is directly lifting humans up, right? And so it's this beautiful overlap of massive problem, and at the same time, it's a micro problem. And if we can bridge, we can use technology to lift people up, we can democratize water, we can do that in a way that makes economic sense and make ever more economic sense, so covering ever more people. I'm here for that.
Amazing, yeah. When you asked the question, Cody, you said, I'm part of the water sector if you'll let me in. I mean, of course you're welcome in, and I think it's a different angle, and like we mentioned, I think when anything is so disruptive and innovative, people tend to perhaps, what are they doing, but actually, like, it's a tool in the toolbox of solutions to help get us towards a day when everyone has access to water, right? So, and we can't just think about it has to be a one solution. There's multiple different solutions, and I think the fact that this marries together decentralized with digital has a lot going for it. So, but yeah, we want to have you back onto the podcast to kind of keep us updated on the progress and where you're going, and see how the company's progressing. But Will, any kind of final comments from you to round out here?
Keep disrupting and keep pushing. The water sector desperately needs it, and it's painful to watch, but nothing's going to get done if we don't break things.
Yeah, and I'm really appreciative of you guys having me on. It's fun to tell this story in this forum where it's just a conversation, because obviously, I'm getting, usually when we're doing an interview, I'm getting peppered with questions and I'm sort of responding in real time, and then whoever the reporter writes whatever they want to write. But I think the reality of the situation is that I think whenever you're talking about innovators or entrepreneurs who are trying to solve big problems, there's this natural reaction of like, what, wait, you're trying to change my box here.
Yeah.
But the reality is that those people, myself included, it's all about the best intentions. And 100% of us think we're right. And a fraction of those will be right. And the fraction that are right change the world, right? I think it's George Bernard Shaw, right? Said something like, I'm going to get it wrong, but the reasonable man sees the world as is and accepts it. The unreasonable man sees the world as it is and tries to change it. Therefore, all progress is made by unreasonable men. I'll replace that with people, right? Unreasonable people all the way through. But I think that has to be true. And so it's a necessary but insufficient condition. So thank you guys for being so unreasonable today.
Well, our pleasure. That's a great compliment.
Here's to unreasonable people. Something
yeah,
we definitely love to celebrate and bring in unreasonable thinking and business as unusual, as we say, right, Will? So Cody, really appreciate having you on. Thanks for the great conversation and all the best in moving the needle and being unreasonable as well.
All right. All the best, guys.
And you'll get the pin. So take care of yourself. We can't forget that.
Please overnight it because I need it soon.
All right.
We expect to see it on every single media appearance
there we go.
on the global stage.
All right. Take care of yourself. Be well.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.